All right, welcome. Today we're going to play detective and investigate a very mysterious and often invisible intruder, mold. We're going to follow the clues through the entire professional inspection process, from that first suspicion to the lab analysis and right on through to the final all clear. So let's start with the very first clue.
You know that smell, right? We've all been there. You walk into a room, maybe the basement, and you get that unmistakable, musty odor. You look around, can't see anything wrong, but that smell, that's often the very first clue your house gives you that something is up. It's a warning sign that it's time to dig a little deeper.
And this is exactly why that smell is so important. The real problem is almost always completely hidden from sight. See, mold loves dark, damp places. We're talking behind walls, under your carpet, and yeah, even deep inside your air ducts, spreading spores through your whole home every single time the system kicks on.
So how in the world do you find an enemy you can't even see? Well, just like any good detective, a mold inspector shows up with a very specialized toolkit. This isn't just about poking around with a flashlight. This is about using some serious tech to see the unseen.
The first thing they do is hunt for the source of the problem. And mold needs one thing to survive more than anything else: water. A thermal imaging camera can spot tiny temperature differences inside a wall, a huge clue that often points to hidden moisture. Then, they follow up with a moisture meter to get a direct reading and confirm, yep, there's water here.
And this is probably the most important part of this whole initial search. It's not really about finding the mold itself, not at first. It's about finding its life source. Once they pinpoint the exact location of that water, whether it's a slow leak, a roof issue, or just crazy high humidity, they know exactly where to focus the rest of the investigation.
And to get actual eyes on the situation, without, smashing a hole in your wall, they use tools like this borescope. It's basically a tiny little camera on a long, flexible tube. They can just snake it through a small opening to get a direct look at what's going on inside that wall cavity.
Okay, so once the inspector has zeroed in on the potential hotspots, the next phase kicks in: gathering hard evidence. This is where the whole thing shifts from just investigating to real hard science. And it all starts with collecting samples.
Now, this machine might look a little intimidating, but its job is actually pretty simple and incredibly precise. It's a special air sampling pump. It pulls a very specific, measured amount of air through that little cassette on top, which acts like a tiny trap for any microscopic mold spores that are floating around. But here's the absolute key to making this evidence mean something. A pro doesn't just take a sample from the room that smells funny. They always take an outdoor control sample for comparison. Why? Well, think about it. Mold spores are literally everywhere outside. It's just a normal part of nature. The lab needs that outdoor baseline to see if the types and amount of spores inside your house are way higher than what's considered normal. And to make sure everything is completely above board, the inspector doesn't analyze these samples themselves. Nope. They're sealed up and sent off to an independent, accredited, third-party lab. This is so important because it guarantees the results you get are purely scientific and totally unbiased. Okay, so the samples have been collected, they're off at the lab. Now what? Well, the next step is to decode all that evidence to figure out exactly what's going on. The lab report is what tells the rest of the story.
Different clues need different tests. That air sampling we just talked about, that's perfect when you think there might be hidden mold or you're just worried about your air quality, because it tells you exactly what you're breathing in. But if you can actually see something suspicious growing, a direct surface swab or a tape lift can be used to identify the exact type of mold right there on the spot.
So you might be wondering, what does this kind of scientific certainty cost? Well, according to our source material, a standard lab analysis for one of these air or surface samples is typically going to run you about $125. It's really an investment in getting clear, objective answers.
And for really complex cases, the investigation can go even deeper. There are specialized tests like ERMI sampling, which actually uses DNA analysis of dust to build a whole mold history of the property. Or even bulk sampling, where they literally send a chunk of drywall or insulation straight to the lab for testing. All right, with the lab results in hand, all that detective work leads to the final stage: understanding the report and finally moving toward a solution. This is where all the pieces of the puzzle come together.
So, the result of all this work isn't some confusing page of scientific jargon. It's a clear, detailed report. It tells you the specific types of mold they found, how much of it there is, and how that compares to normal levels. It gives you a definite yes or no answer to the question, do I have a problem?
Now let's fast forward. The report confirmed there was a problem, and you hired a company to clean it all up. They did the work, they fixed the leak, but how do you know the job is really truly done? How can you be sure the air in your home is actually safe to breathe again? It's a really important final question. And the answer is something called post-remediation verification, or PRV. You might also hear it called clearance testing. And this part is absolutely crucial. After the cleanup crew says they're finished, a completely independent inspector, often the same one who did the first test, comes back to do another round of air sampling. This is the ultimate check, removing any conflict of interest and giving you unbiased proof that the job was done right.
At the end of the day, this PRV test isn't just an extra step. It's your proof. It provides that scientific validation you need to know that the cleanup actually worked, the spore counts are back to normal, and that your home's air is healthy again. It's what gives you real peace of mind.
You know, this whole entire process really comes down to one simple but pretty powerful question. We spend so much time and energy thinking about what's in our food and our water. But shouldn't we also know what's in the air we breathe for hours every single day? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.